But it was a really big weekend for Hollywood. You had the Barbieheimer effect, right? Everyone was going to see Barbie or they're going to see Oppenheimer, and they did. In fact, it was the fourth highest grossing weekend of all time. Now, a lot of that is because the prices are more expensive than they've ever been, but Hollywood doesn't care. They're making money. And yes, Barbie ended up doing blockbuster business. Oppenheimer, pretty good as well, with I think about $80 million in box office receipts. That's all great stuff. Good for them. But the real story of the weekend in Hollywood has to do with a film that we've talked about quite a bit here, The Sound of Freedom, from Angel Studios, starring Jim Caviezel. We had an exclusive interview with James Caviezel last week. Great feedback on that interview, by the way, and we talked about how this movie got made, why other studios didn't want to touch it. And boy, oh boy, are people responding to this movie. Now, Barbie was gonna be a huge hit because you couldn't go anywhere without seeing hype for this thing, right? You saw marketing, you saw advertising, you saw posters, you saw pink everywhere. Every single network, every single cable network, they all did their special little exposés on Barbie and how Barbie world is going to take over the country. And, well, let's face it, they got a very pretty blonde actress dressed in skimpy little pink outfits in Margot Robbie. And whenever you see that on the screen, it catches people's eye. Not to mention the fact that the Barbie brand and the Barbie doll has been around for, what, 70 years now? That's a whole lot of women who were little girls playing with dolls who were ready. They were primed. They were going to buy their tickets. That's a whole lot of hype and a whole lot of media to support that opening weekend. So, of course, they did well. They also didn't get coverage like this that Sound of Freedom got. Here's the Rolling Stone. To know thousands of adults will absorb Sound of Freedom, the vigilante fever dream, and come away thinking themselves better informed on a hidden civilizational crisis is profoundly depressing. Worse still, they'll want to spread the word. The headline for that review, Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. That's not a good review at all. Bloomberg also gave Sound of Freedom the ugly treatment. QAnon and Sound of Freedom both rely on tired Hollywood tropes. Sex trafficking movies routinely skip over some very important questions, which gives the conspiratorial right room to run wild. I'm sorry, what very important questions do we need to be asking and answering about sex trafficking other than how evil are these people? That's really the only question that any normal human being needs to ask. So there's Rolling Stone, there's Bloomberg. We had the same thing from CNN, we had the same thing from CBS, we had the same thing from most of the people in the media. If they covered Sound of Freedom at all, they covered it in a way that intimidated people who might be interested in the subject matter, painted everybody into a corner of conspiracy theorists, and they basically tried to pre-shame anyone who had any interest in seeing the movie. If anything, the pre-movie hype for Sound of Freedom was designed to keep people from buying tickets, to keep people from going to see it, the opposite of what we saw with Barbie. That's why what I'm about to show you is incredibly extraordinary. Now, last week we told you that Sound of Freedom was on the brink of surpassing $100 million in gross ticket sales in its fourth week of release. We've already told you that on July 4th, Sound of Freedom beat the Indiana Jones movie that had a multi-$100 million budget. But what I'm about to show you blows all of that away. Here's the weekend receipts for this weekend. Number one, as we mentioned, Barbie, $155 million gross. Number two, first week on the charts, Oppenheimer, $80 million. And then look at that, number three. Not Mission Impossible, who just debuted last week. Mission Impossible debuted last week. Go ahead and bring it back up here, because we've got to look at these numbers. Mission Impossible debuted last week with over $100 million in sales, and this week, in its second week, drops down to fourth place. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, it's grossed $159 million, as you can see on the far right column, but it's already in fifth place now in its 6th week on the charts. There's number three. There's the third highest grossing movie of the land, only behind Barbie and Oppenheimer, with those millions of dollars in budget. Sound of Freedom now close to $125 million. It's the little movie that could. It's the little movie that is flipping Hollywood on its head. It's the movie that you were told you shouldn't see. They actually shamed you if you thought about seeing it, but you're not paying attention. You're following your heart, you're following your mind, and you're following your friend's advice because the word of mouth was extraordinary. The Sound of Freedom is Hollywood's feel-good story of the year, even though the actual plot doesn't feel good at all. There's hope. There's hope for Hollywood as long as movies are made outside of Hollywood. That's it for tonight. There's more to come tomorrow. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.